I never imagined I'd see a grown woman crawling across my basement floor, only to get blasted by a squad of skunks in the throes of mating season. The mere recollection makes my nostrils flare in phantom agony. I can still picture the panic in her eyes, that fleeting moment when she realized her entire plan had backfired so spectacularly. You're probably wondering why anyone would lurk beneath a neighbor's house, let alone risk it during the skunk's most pungent time of year. The answer, like most jaw-dropping stories, begins with a feud. In my case, it was sparked by an overzealous homeowners association president, a suburban warrior named Karen Caldwell, who believed control was her birthright. Allow me to recount how it all played out. You might find yourself both horrified and oddly satisfied before we reach the finale. My name is Finn Scott. I've spent the better part of my adult life photographing misunderstood wildlife in remote regions, though I never thought the biggest threat I'd encounter would be a human, not an animal. 6 months ago, I decided to relocate to a tranquil enclave called Ashland Meadows. It's the kind of suburban neighborhood that developers market as a perfect haven. Neat lawns, pastel-colored houses, symmetrical flower beds, and that ever-present homeowners association designed to keep everything uniform. Stepping into my new place felt like acquiring a slice of calm after countless journeys in rugged terrains. Yet I couldn't have predicted that the real conflict would arise from a person next door. From the very first week in Ashland Meadows, rumors about Karen Caldwell found their way to me. Neighbors warned me of her tendency to prowl the streets armed with a clipboard. She'd measure the height of your grass, scrutinize the shade of your fence paint, and document potential violations that only her keen eyes could see. I wasn't overly worried at first. I considered myself a good resident, mowing regularly and avoiding loud noises at night. But my serenity began unraveling one grisly afternoon when I noticed movement behind my shrubs, someone peeking in the direction of my windows. After stepping outside to investigate, I saw Karen vanish around the corner. Little did I realize that was her standard approach: gather intel, then strike with official-looking citations. The following morning, my doorbell rang. Karen stood there, wearing a bright floral blouse and carrying that infamous clipboard. Her porcelain smile held all the warmth of a frozen statue. "Good day. I'm Karen Caldwell. I like to personally greet all new arrivals," she announced. She handed me a thick binder that rattled with paperwork. 73 pages of community guidelines. Don't worry, sections 4 through 17 are the most crucial. Appearance, lawn height, fence color. You get the idea. I tried introducing myself more thoroughly, but she was busy surveying my property, eyes narrowed at a row of my newly planted native perennials. She pointed her pen at them, tapped her paper. "These wildflowers will need official HOA approval. Page 42 of that binder covers the request form. They might not be in line with uniform standards." Before I could respond, she spun around and strode off, her ponytail swinging like a metronome behind her. My welcome to this quiet suburb felt more like an inspection by a border official. Later that day, I bumped into Mrs. Patel, a longtime resident who radiated warmth like a beloved aunt. When I mentioned Karen's visit, she shook her head and murmured, "4 families fled last year because of that woman. It's best to tread carefully." I might have shrugged it off if my work didn't soon collide with Karen's HOA rulebook. You see, I'm not just a photographer, I also volunteer in wildlife rehabilitation, holding proper permits that allow me to provide short-term care to injured critters. My basement, unlike most, has a state-of-the-art ventilation system and a layout conducive to isolating animals for medical observation. I never expected to use that space so soon after moving in, but about a month later, during a harsh rainstorm, I spotted 3 skunks, a mother with a wounded leg, and two juveniles, huddled under my porch. Their fur was matted, and the mother skunk limped severely. I couldn't ignore them. That same night, I carefully coaxed them inside and set up a makeshift rehab area in the far corner of my basement. A close friend of mine, Dr. Samantha Lewis, is a wildlife biologist specializing in small mammals. She agreed to drop by the next morning and examine them. I was aware that skunks have a reputation for delivering foul-smelling blasts, but they rarely spray unless threatened, so I handled them gently. I talked to them in hushed tones, letting them know I wasn't a danger. Seeing their frightened eyes and hearing their anxious chuffing triggered my protective instincts. I've spent years documenting animals deemed pests, and I always feel compelled to prove their inherent value. News travels fast in small neighborhoods, especially if the local busybody is patrolling your perimeter. By the time Dr. Lewis arrived, Karen was already lurking near my driveway, snapping photos on her phone. When she realized I saw her, she disappeared behind a hedge, like a fox retreating into the underbrush. Samantha examined the animals. "The leg needs attention, but it isn't beyond saving," she told me, while applying antibiotic ointment to the mother's wound. "The juveniles are underweight, but that's fixable." We both knew that the looming concern was the arrival of mating season. Skunks release especially potent odors during this period. Even a top-tier ventilation system can only do so much. I was mentally preparing for a slight musk that might drift upstairs, when late that afternoon I received a notice taped to my front door. Official HOA stationery. Karen's signature scribbled at the bottom. It demanded I remove unauthorized wild animals within 48 hours. Staring at that piece of paper, I felt my jaw clench. She was trying to force me to break state wildlife rehab laws or face an avalanche of fines. That was the moment I realized I'd stepped into a real showdown. I decided to attend the upcoming HOA meeting, accompanied by Dr. Lewis, armed with documentation proving I held the right to rehabilitate wildlife. The meeting took place in a stuffy little building that smelled of old carpet and stale coffee. Karen sat at the central table, flanked by board members who resembled an audience of nodding figurines. She immediately launched into a tirade about my alleged disregard for the rules. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent far too long believing she was all-powerful. She clicked a remote. Blurry snapshots of my basement appeared on a projector screen. "These are skunks, people," she announced, her voice rising with dramatic emphasis. "They can escape, they carry disease, their smell can cling to walls." She rambled about property values dropping, about public safety hazards. Some residents shifted in their seats. Others looked bored or exasperated. When it was my turn, I remained composed, presenting my official permits, while Dr. Lewis explained the legal protections for rehabilitating injured wildlife. We pointed out how forcibly removing them now could harm their chances of survival. A hush descended upon the room. Karen's eyes flickered with frustration. She pushed for an immediate vote on eviction, but a few more open-minded board members suggested a compromise. "Give me 2 weeks, provided I keep any nuisance to a minimum." Relief coursed through me. I believed logic and compassion had prevailed. But Karen's clenched jaw told me otherwise. She was plotting something, and that awareness made me uneasy. Within a week, I noticed Karen's presence escalating. She'd power walk past my place at sunrise. She'd stroll by again at twilight. My security cameras caught her peering through a basement window, presumably trying to film the skunks. The animals themselves were recovering well. Marigold, the mother, had begun putting weight on her previously injured leg, and the juveniles were becoming more playful. The unfortunate side effect was the intensifying musk. Even with advanced filters, some odor drifted into my home. It was tolerable to me, but possibly less so to neighbors. One day, I found an intimidating letter tucked inside my mailbox, apparently from a prestigious law firm. It threatened to sue me for damages to the community. The language was so overblown I suspected it was bogus. That suspicion was confirmed when Samantha, who is well connected in legal circles, checked the firm's website and found no mention of my case. Another petty scare tactic. Meanwhile, new violation notices multiplied. Everything from unapproved landscaping to excessive bird feeder activity. Karen was obviously trying to bury me under fines and warnings, hoping I'd pack up and leave. I confided in Mrs. Patel over tea. She sipped from her porcelain cup, nodding solemnly when I described Karen's intensifying efforts. "She's done this before," Mrs. Patel murmured. "There's more to it than a petty obsession with rules. Rumors suggest she's in cahoots with the development company. Some folks think she's pushing homeowners to sell cheap. Then that company snatches up the properties." My eyes widened at the suggestion. When I pressed her for details, she mentioned a firm called Evergreen Development. Karen had once worked for them, only to be fired for questionable practices. Piecing the puzzle together, I hypothesized that Karen might still have ties to Evergreen, orchestrating a stealthy property grab. My corner lot presumably made me a prime target. Her meddling was more than personal annoyance. It was part of a larger scheme to drive out undisciples who wouldn't comply with her tyranny or let their homes go. Angered yet resolute, I installed new motion sensors and additional cameras around my property. If Karen or her associates tried trespassing, I wanted video evidence. Sure enough, the cameras caught her and a sidekick, Rod Jenkins, a smitten board member, attempting to peek into my garage late at night. Under the glare of a security light, they panicked and fled. I shared the footage with a local police officer, Joel Turner. He said he'd file a report, but cautioned that the trespassers had only been snooping. If they actually forced entry, that would be criminal. Officer Turner's stoic demeanor told me the best I could do was gather more proof. The following evening, I wrapped up feeding the skunks, then checked my phone. The security app showed Karen lurking around the basement door again, evidently testing the lock. She left after a few minutes. Dr. Lewis, upon hearing about this brazen behavior, proposed an idea that made me smile in spite of the stress. "If she's so determined to get footage of your skunks, maybe we should let her have a front row seat," Sam suggested. I realized precisely what she meant. A gentle rearranging of the basement environment, ensuring that any unauthorized entrant would trigger more than a mild odor. I hated the notion of setting a trap that might startle the animals. However, Karen had nearly guaranteed she would intrude no matter what. So Sam and I carefully adjusted the lighting, placed some objects so that if someone entered unannounced, they would make noise. Skunks, particularly during mating season, do not appreciate surprises. Meanwhile, I set up hidden cameras with perfect vantage points to capture everything. Our objective wasn't to harm anyone, but to gather indisputable evidence of unlawful entry. That next night, I had a short university presentation scheduled. As soon as I finished speaking, I hurried to my car and pulled up the live security feed on my laptop. Sure enough, I saw movement near my back entrance. Karen had returned with Rod standing guard by the curb. She fished out some tool from her bag, a small pick or bobby pin, and fiddled with my lock. I watched, heart pounding, as she managed to get inside. Once she slipped downstairs, I activated the overhead lights remotely. She dropped her phone with a clatter, the abrupt illumination startling her. The sound reverberated in the enclosed space, enough to alarm the skunks, and once a startled skunk feels cornered, we all know what happens. I heard a frantic shriek through the audio feed. The mother skunk must have unleashed her infamous spray in Karen's direction. The visuals from my camera were priceless. Karen's eyes bulged in horror, her arms flailed, as she realized every breath drew in that unmistakable stench. Her head jerked around in desperation, searching for an exit, but the locked door wouldn't budge without a key. Within seconds, multiple skunks joined in. The juveniles, frightened by commotion, also took a defensive stance. Thick, oily droplets splattered onto Karen's designer clothes. She tried covering her nose with her sleeve, only to smear the substance over her face. It was comedic on one level, but also pitiful. Her shrieks morphed into choking sobs. She yelled for Rod, but he was nowhere to be seen. He'd apparently abandoned ship at the first sign of trouble. 15 minutes later, I alerted Officer Turner, explaining that a break-in was happening at my address. When the police arrived, they could hardly approach her without retching. A toxic cloud of skunk musk hung in the air, forcing them to don masks. They unlocked the door, helped Karen stumble out. Her hair dripped with yellowish residue. Tears streaked her cheeks. The smell clung to her so tenaciously that even the crisp night breeze couldn't diminish it. Officer Turner promptly arrested her for trespassing. She shrieked she'd sue everybody, particularly me, but no one volunteered to get close enough to hear her entire threat. That alone might have been a satisfying conclusion for some, but the ripple effects were only beginning. The next day, Karen posted bail, though she had to endure stares from neighbors who could smell her coming from yards away. Yet her ambition for revenge persisted. She threatened to file lawsuits, claiming I'd lured her into a biological hazard. Dr. Lewis stepped forward, reminding everyone that Karen had broken in with the intent to gather incriminating footage to use against me. At that point, many residents, fed up with Karen's antics, began contacting me to share their own run-ins with her. One older gentleman confided that he had sold his house for tens of thousands under market value simply to escape her tyranny. Meanwhile, Rod tried to salvage his own reputation. At first, he lied to the police, claiming I'd left the door wide open, but the camera footage exposed everything. Realizing he faced potential charges, he finally admitted Karen had orchestrated the entire scheme. His humiliating confession destroyed any lingering credibility he had on the board. A significant breakthrough came from James Peterson, a prominent lawyer who had always backed Karen's strict enforcement, believing it safeguarded property values. He had started investigating a possible partnership with a development firm, Evergreen, and discovered Karen's hidden financial arrangements. She'd apparently been receiving kickbacks for every property that Evergreen managed to acquire. At a hastily scheduled HOA meeting, James shared emails he'd found, exposing how Karen colluded with Evergreen executives. They had a plan: systematically drive out owners they considered obstacles, leaving properties ripe for cheap acquisition. Screenshots of Karen's personal emails to these executives caused uproar. She singled out specific homes, recommending strategies like repeated violation notices or fines to wear people down. The immediate shock on the Zoom call was deafening. Neighbors demanded she resign right then. Karen's face turned various shades of pale and crimson while she clutched at her microphone, claiming the emails were taken out of context. No one believed it. The subsequent legal ramifications escalated rapidly. Officer Turner widened his inquiry into Karen, linking her to older cases of forgery and fraud from her days at Evergreen. The district attorney took notice, launching a more extensive probe. Karen ended up facing multiple charges: trespassing, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violations of her fiduciary duties as an HOA president. Evergreen executives were investigated as well. By the time the dust settled, the development company faced massive fines. Its top managers were indicted for their roles in the scam. Meanwhile, Ashland Meadows held an emergency vote to appoint a new interim HOA head. Mrs. Patel, widely respected for her kindness, was chosen almost unanimously. Freed from Karen's oppressive rules, people began personalizing their lawns without fear of punitive notices. Mrs. Patel convened open forums to discuss overdue reforms. Residents joked that they could finally plant flowers without feeling like criminals. For a while, Karen tried continuing her vendetta, digging into my past to find any scandal. She discovered that years earlier, I'd been arrested during a protest against an urban development project encroaching on protected forest. It was a minor incident in which participants had chained themselves to trees to prevent bulldozers from wiping out a habitat. The charges had been dropped, but Karen saw it as her last card to play. She spread rumors I was a radical environmental extremist. To her dismay, the story of me standing up for wildlife resonated positively. People viewed me as someone willing to defend nature. Her smear campaign fizzled immediately. During all of this, the 3 skunks I'd been caring for continued to improve. Marigold regained strength in her leg. The youngsters developed healthy appetites and became playful, yet still cautious of human presence. Exactly the mindset needed for eventual release into the wild. Mating season came and went. The pungent cloud that had occasionally enveloped my basement diminished once the skunks grew more relaxed. I decided to wait until they were fully stabilized before setting them free in a designated conservation area a short drive away. The day I released them, a few neighbors gathered to watch. Mrs. Patel even brought her grandchildren, who watched with wide-eyed fascination as the animals emerged from their temporary enclosure and shuffled off into the underbrush. My friend Dr. Lewis explained to the small crowd how crucial skunks are for pest control. They consume insects and rodents, helping maintain ecological balance. That educational moment fostered goodwill in the community. It was the polar opposite of the climate Karen had tried to create. Karen herself showed up at the edge of the group, still reeking faintly of that notorious stench, though she'd attempted to mask it with layers of perfume. She didn't say much. She just stood there, arms folded, glaring. Eventually, she turned away, got into her car, and slammed the door. Days later, I heard she'd put her house on the market. Given the investigations swirling around her, it wasn't a shock. Word on the street was that she found a property in another state specifically avoiding HOAs. The irony was obvious. The biggest champion of HOA dominance didn't want anything to do with that environment after her downfall. As legal proceedings advanced, Karen tried to bargain. She accepted a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial. The terms included restitution for everyone she had coerced into selling their homes at a loss. Her attorney must have negotiated vigorously, but the evidence of conspiracy and fraud was daunting. She agreed to house arrest for 18 months and was permanently barred from holding any real estate or HOA leadership position. Evergreen Development wasn't spared either. They paid enormous fines and faced a forced dissolution. In the months that followed, Ashland Meadows evolved. Under Mrs. Patel's guidance, residents rewrote many restrictive covenants, eliminating rules that served no community interest. They introduced transparency measures, open board meetings, recorded votes, annual elections. The pressure to maintain identical lawns faded, allowing more creative expression. Some people planted pollinator gardens, others added whimsical sculptures or solar panels. The neighborhood took on a friendlier vibe, evidenced by the casual gatherings that sprang up. Neighbors shared gardening tips, instead of gossip or resentment. I found my position in the community shifting in a curious way. Early on, everyone seemed wary that I might draw trouble because of my unusual vocation. Now, though, parents asked me if I could give little talks to their kids about wildlife. Local elementary schools invited me to discuss preserving habitats. The folks who used to wave politely from across the street began bringing homemade brownies over, eager to chat about birds, squirrels, raccoons, any creature they had questions about. Even Rod, once Karen's staunch ally, approached me privately. Standing on my porch, he admitted he'd been a fool, enthralled by Karen's manipulative confidence. "I was blind to the bigger picture," he said softly. His face showed genuine regret. "I let myself get carried away." I sensed a complicated blend of shame and relief in his posture. He offered to help with a neighborhood wildlife project Mrs. Patel had launched, focusing on building small habitats for pollinators and other beneficial species. I accepted, figuring it was a sign that healing was possible. Eventually, word got around about the entire skunk fiasco. People in the region joked about the notorious incident in which the unstoppable force of an HOA queen collided with the immovable power of chubby, well-armed skunks. Some individuals from outside the neighborhood reached out to see if the rumors were true. "Did she really get trapped in your basement for 15 minutes while they sprayed her?" they'd ask, barely containing laughter. I'd confirm it, all the while emphasizing that trespassing to harass wildlife can have quite pungent consequences. The final phase of Karen's saga culminated on sentencing day. She arrived in the courtroom, hair meticulously styled, but there was no trace of that once unshakable arrogance. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts. The judge listed the terms of her punishment: restitution, extended probation, and relinquishment of any leadership roles. When the proceedings ended, she avoided eye contact with everyone. The faint echo of skunk musk may have been psychological at that point, but I doubt she or anyone in that room would ever forget it. A few weeks later, as I sipped coffee on my back deck, I spotted a familiar silhouette in my yard. Marigold, the mother skunk, hobbling around. She sniffed the air, appearing to remember the safe harbor she found here before. Her youngsters, now almost adult size, followed behind, rummaging for insects in the grass. I stood still, not wanting to alarm them. After a minute they scurried away, tails twitching, knowing they had survived, out in the wild as they were meant to be, gave me an unexpected sense of fulfillment. Ashland Meadows thrived without the shadow of Karen's intimidation. Mrs. Patel continued steering the HOA with a kind, measured approach. People embraced a sense of collective pride, forging a neighborly spirit that might never have surfaced under the former regime. The nightmares of endless violation notices dissolved into stories told around backyard barbecues, always punctuated by a chuckle or a shrug that said, "Can you believe we lived through that?" On a warm evening around dusk, a few of us gathered on the sidewalk, swapping stories about the strangest things we'd ever witnessed in this neighborhood. Mr. Peterson, who'd revealed Karen's financial scheming, recounted how he'd uncovered those damning emails. Mrs. Patel described the baffling array of petty fines she herself had endured until she found the courage to speak out. Rod seemed oddly serene, a man who'd learned a life lesson the hard way, and I told them about the surreal moment I watched Karen spin in circles under fluorescent lights, drenched in noxious sprays, unable to flee. Someone asked if I regretted any part of it. I thought carefully. "I hate the stress it caused the animals," I admitted. Spooking them into spraying wasn't exactly the ideal scenario. But that single incident, documented by my cameras, was the tipping point that exposed Karen's actions. saving countless homeowners from further harassment. The group nodded, acknowledging the messy path that sometimes leads to justice. By the time the night sky darkened, we headed home, carrying a sense of relief that the neighborhood's era of intimidation was behind us. If I have learned one lesson from this entire ordeal, it's that bullies, and yes, that includes a certain brand of HOA tyrant, will eventually self-destruct when confronted by a united front and the unstoppable force of truth. Sometimes that truth just happens to smell like burning rubber, rotten eggs, and garlic all at once. No one wishes for conflict, but some battles come knocking on your door, or, in Karen's case, creeping into your basement. Could the story have ended more gently? Possibly. Yet the memory of her shrill hollers, combined with that thick smog of skunk essence, is unlikely to fade from anyone's recollections soon. Suburban life can appear calm, but hidden currents can drag you under if you're not prepared. I never expected to clash with a cunning neighbor who'd measure my flower beds and stoop to sabotage. Yet from that standoff emerged a stronger, more empathetic community willing to champion fair rules and wildlife preservation. These days, the basement is back to being an occasional rescue space. The ventilation system stands ready, though no creature has matched the comedic calamity of that skunk fiasco. Periodically, I see new families of raccoons, possums, or squirrels in my yard, and I remain on alert to help them if needed. The phone rings more frequently. Curious residents contact me whenever they encounter an injured critter or a puzzling animal dilemma. It's nice to be recognized for something positive, especially after being cast in the role of neighborhood renegade. In the aftermath of Karen's downfall, I discovered a greater passion for community outreach than I ever realized I possessed. I've begun offering short workshops on coexisting with local fauna. Attendance grows each time, with children giggling at photos of baby foxes and older folks marveling at hawk calls echoing through the sky. The entire fiasco, with all its tension and odor, inadvertently paved the way for deeper awareness about nature's value. Strangest of all, I heard a rumor that Karen eventually adopted a cat. Rod mentioned it in passing. Apparently, she posted a photo with the caption, "New beginning from a distant place." If she truly does have a pet, I can only hope that experience broadens her understanding of caring for living creatures. Perhaps facing her own downfall forced her to see the importance of empathy and respect for boundaries, though it's not my place to assume any radical transformation on her part. Neighbors occasionally tease me, calling me skunk whisperer. A few have even whispered that if Karen had possessed a bit more compassion, maybe none of this would have happened. My response is a modest shrug. Life has a way of sorting out those who prey on others. In this instance, it happened with the unintended help of a small band of black and white creatures that society tends to fear. I still marvel at how nature can deliver a comedic brand of justice. Perhaps that's why I remain devoted to photographing misunderstood animals. There's always something new to discover, some hidden depth or comedic twist waiting to be revealed. One afternoon, as I strolled down the street, a neighbor waved me over. She pointed to a small printout taped near a lamp post, a notice that used to read, "HOA violation," except someone had scribbled a giant red X over the words and scrawled, "Set yourself free." We laughed, remembering how Karen's old notices covered the neighborhood like confetti. In their place, you'll now find flyers inviting people to tree planting events or potluck gatherings. Our once rigidly uniform community blossomed into a more diverse, caring environment, each lawn bearing a personal touch. The saga's final chord resonates in the knowledge that everyone who endured Karen's harassment can now breathe freely, figuratively and literally. The stench she left behind faded over time, but the transformation it catalyzed remains visible in every unapproved but beautiful row of native flowers, every newly installed solar panel that once might have triggered a citation. Instead of fines, we have constructive suggestions. The place feels more authentically American now, an eclectic tapestry instead of a rigid pattern. Yes, it took the meltdown of one determined woman who tried to lord over her neighbors, but the chain of events taught us how precious freedom can be, and how fragile it becomes under tyranny. In a roundabout way, I'm grateful she forced us to recognize that. I'd prefer if she'd never tormented half the neighborhood in the first place, but sometimes adversity is the catalyst for real growth. When she crawled into my cellar, she believed she'd uncover enough damning evidence to drive me out. Instead, she stumbled upon her own worst nightmare. Those skunks, with their potent natural defense, revealed the cracks in her ambitions faster than any neighbor's testimony might have. I look back on everything, on the startled looks, the frantic HOA meetings, the avalanche of phony violation notices, the legal tangles, and, of course, that night of wailing shrieks and skunk spray. And I feel relief. Relief that I didn't cave in. Relief that others found courage to stand against intimidation. Relief that the animals I was protecting emerged unscathed. In a different timeline, Karen would have forced them to be confiscated, potentially euthanized. Instead, we let them heal. We gave them a chance at life. And in the process, they helped expose a plot far more sinister than an overgrown lawn or an unapproved mailbox color. From time to time, I still catch faint whiffs of that signature odor in my basement. It's embedded in the corners like a stubborn memory. But I don't mind it as much as I might have once. It has become symbolic of standing your ground against bullies, of the comedic power of the natural world, and of how every link in a community can unite when given the chance. The day Karen slunk away from the neighborhood, trying to mask her lingering stench with perfume, felt like the conclusion of one chapter and the start of something better. No matter where she is now, I hope she learned at least one lesson. If you're bent on spying in a place where skunks reside, always remember that arrogance often leads to downfall. More specifically, a pungent downfall that seeps into your every fiber. As for me, I'm continuing my photography and rehab work in Ashland Meadows, where the nights are quiet except for the occasional rustle of wildlife in the underbrush. Each day reminds me that small acts of compassion can spark monumental changes. And that's reason enough to stay right where I am.